One of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of my life began with my parents saying, "Absolutely not. Are you crazy?" It was my freshman year in high school, and I had just received a brochure in the mail from Apogee Adventures that advertised several outdoor summer trips all over the United States. Originally, my parents were pushing me to participate in an academic camp during the upcoming summer. However, I now had other ideas. As many of you know, I enjoy biking a lot, and the brochure I had just received offered many biking trips ranging from 200 miles to over 2,000 miles long. The most appealing trip to me at the time was called America Coast to Coast. During this trip, participants would bike from a beach in Charleston, South Carolina, to a beach in San Diego, California. This sounded pretty fun to me at the moment, so I told my parents this was what I wanted to do in the upcoming summer instead of a boring academic camp. They began reading the details of this trip, which included biking over 2,700 miles in 40 days, as well as crossing the Rocky Mountains and riding through the Texas heat and Arizona desert. After a brief talk with my parents, it was here where I received the reply of, "Absolutely not. Are you crazy?" However, those words from my parents did not stop me from trying to convince them to let me do it. Their reasoning was that it was always simply too long, too physically challenging, and too dangerous. But after some time, I reached a compromise with them. The summer after my freshman year, my parents told me that I would have to successfully complete one of the shorter biking trips to see if I still wanted to take on the challenge of the trip across the country. I ended up choosing the Coast to Quebec trip. So in the summer of 2017, I began my trip in Freeport, Maine, and biked around 500 miles with a group of kids my age to Quebec City, Canada. During this trip, we would bike an average of 40 plus miles a day and spend the night at various campsites along the way. After the 15-day trip, I was reunited with my parents, and the first thing I asked was, "Can I do the one across the country now?" They responded with the classic, "We'll think about it later" comment. Throughout my whole sophomore year, my biggest dream was still to bike across the United States. As the school year progressed, my parents finally agreed to let me apply for the trip. The trip company, Apogee, reviewed my application and gave me approval to participate in the U.S. coast-to-coast trip. I spent the next 4 months diligently training, and finally, at the end of June, I flew to Charleston, South Carolina to take on the challenge I'd been waiting almost 2 years to do. The first few days of the trip were fairly easy as we biked 40 to 60 miles a day. However, the next weeks were when the trip began to get pretty challenging. We would bike anywhere from 80 to over 110 miles a day, and the blistering summer heat began to take a toll on our bodies. Over the next few weeks, our group of 12 began to grow pretty close, but that also came with some conflict and frustration. There was one day in particular where I felt that I was pushed beyond my limits, both mentally and physically. August 2nd, 2018 began at 3 in the morning. I awoke to music being played in honor of my 17th birthday. That day, I would bike over 120 miles from Phoenix, Arizona to our destination for the night in Wyndon, Arizona. It was not only the longest day of our journey, but it was also the hottest day that we had faced so far, with heat indexes exceeding 120 degrees. However, I persevered on through this day, dealing with some of the most difficult challenges I have ever faced in my life. There were many times that day when I felt I would not be able to make it. Perhaps the most aggravating part of the day was when one boy, Kyle, broke the gears on his bike once again by doing something our leaders and myself had warned him multiple times not to do. Having already earned the reputation of being the best bike mechanic on the team, I knew I should step up and help. The problem was that Kyle and I already had several conflicts on this trip due to his carelessness and lack of motivation. In this instance, part of me wanted to refuse to fix his bike and let the two leaders struggle on their own to solve the problem. However, I knew that I was desperately needed in this situation, and I wanted our group to make it to Winden before sunset. It took over 2 hours to repair his bike, and during this time, I would glance over at my friends, including Kyle, all laying on the side of the road, resting in the shade from the heat. I ended up cutting my hand on one of the metal bike parts, and I started to become quite angry. Although this repair may have seemed small to some, it put me in an extremely challenging mental position because of my prior conflicts with Kyle, whose bike I was fixing. It was also my birthday, and we'd already been biking since 4 in the morning, and I could have easily left this problem with my 2 leaders to deal with. However, upon reaching Winden really late that night, I thought more about choosing to step up and help during our group's time of need. I was glad that I had helped with the changing of over 20 flats that day, as well as fixing Kyle's bike. Just before we went to bed, our leader Tim came over and thanked me for the help I gave the group that day. I feel as if this day showed me something about leadership and changed the way I look at hard situations. This day helped change my mindset on our final 500 miles to San Diego. From then on, I realized that making sacrifices for others and our group, even if it is not the easiest, is the honorable and right thing to do. Also, I found that serving others with my skills helped me to grow as a leader and is reminiscent of the servant leadership attitude we are taught daily here at TMI. By the end of this trip, I never expected that I would experience events that changed the way I view challenges as this trip did. However, I now know that I was able to complete my biggest challenge and dream so far in my life. Before I finished my bike trip, I would often become nervous or try to avoid some harder challenges that came my way. So I encourage you to take on that next hard challenge, whether it be signing up for a difficult class you are unsure if you can do, or take on a dream you have. No matter what people say about your abilities, if you set your mind to it and fully commit yourself, you can find a way to succeed in whatever you do. Many people I know doubted my abilities to complete the hard challenge of a 2,700-mile bike trip, but I told myself that it was something I wanted to do and overcome with success. When you overcome a hard challenge, it will help give you confidence to take on even more difficult things that life throws at you. Moreover, you will more than likely discover things about yourself that you didn't know, and it will also make other challenges seem less intimidating and more within the realm of accomplishment. Thank you.